Okay, so now you can see I've got the middle of the design done, and basically for this design that was the wording. And now I'm going to work on the top words, which says God's grace. And if you can see, some of the word is going to be cross-stitched, some of the part of the letters, and then some of it's going to be outlined. Anytime that you're going to have outlining with cross stitch, you're going to want to do your cross stitches first and then your outlining. So I'm going to do this cross stitching first, and I don't know how well my camera is going to pick it up, but the symbol here is just a little circle inside of the square. And so what we do is we go to our legend here, and we see that the circle is color 3802. So then I get my card that I have all of my colors separated on, and we can see that color 3802 is the dark mauve. And I'm going to take the color off of the card and pull one string out and then separate it. Remember how I showed you there are 6 strands, per string, or 6 strings per strand, and I'm going to separate 2 from there and thread my needle, and then I'll be back. Okay, so now to start your cross stitch, what you're going to need to find is a place to start counting from. And I'm using the T here, the top part of the T, and I'm going to count. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the full first cross stitch is on the 6th block up from that T. So now what I'm going to do is go to my cloth, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this square here is the same square that correlates on the pattern, and this is going to be where my first full cross stitch starts. So that's the hole I'm going to want to start in. So I'm just going to leave my fingernail there to hold my place, and I'm going to come up through the bottom of my cloth with my needle and pull it up, and in the same fashion I'm going to leave a tail of thread, and I'm just going to hang on to it. And actually what I want to do is bring it towards the top of the pattern, because that's going to be the direction I'm going to be stitching in to begin with. Now this is important. When you're cross stitching, you're going to want your stitches to be uniform and even. So if you go in this direction, this is going to be your first half cross stitch. You're going to want all of your crosses that are in this direction to be on the bottom. If that's the way you start, then you're going to want to keep that pattern throughout your entire cross stitch pattern, that all crosses in this direction are the bottom stitch. And the same way I showed you before, while I'm holding this thread, the tail of the thread, I'm going to make sure that it gets stitched over on the back so that it's secured in place. So the next stitch you would take would be one hole up from the top of that last stitch. Oh, I just lost my needle, sorry about that. And I'm going to try and make sure that that tail is caught up in that stitch so that it's secured, and it's being a little difficult. Okay, now you can see that. So when I pull this through, that tail is now secured, so I don't have to worry about it. And again, I'm going to come down in that same diagonal direction. Okay, and those are our first 3 half stitches. I'm going to go back to the pattern and show you, because you see on the pattern you have 3 cross stitches in this dark mauve color that are this part of the G. And now I'm going to cross over. See where I left off. Okay. I left off going through this hole here. So I'm going to come to the hole underneath it. And then a diagonal to the hole up above, and now you've made your first full cross stitch. And I'm going to come through this hole here and cross over. And then up through this hole and cross over. And now we've made, I mean, see this, I got a little knot, but sometimes if you just give it a little pull, it pulls it right out. Now we've made 3 full cross stitches. And you can see all the stitches that are in this direction are underneath, and all the stitches in this direction are on top. And you're going to want to keep that pattern fluid and even throughout your entire picture. Now this calls for a quarter stitch. Right here is a quarter stitch. So we're not going to make a full cross stitch here. What we're going to do where the quarter stitch goes is we're going to come up through the hole, but rather than going all the way diagonally across to the bottom hole, we're going to have to kind of work the needle through the middle of that little square, and that's going to be our quarter stitch. And it will make more sense when the outlining is done, but that's what a quarter stitch looks like. So I'm just going to continue to count, you know, however many rows over that I need to go and how many stitches up I need to do in quarter stitches, and I'm going to do that for all of these letters, and then I'll be back. Now I've completed the counted cross stitch and the quarter stitches that are in the pattern for the words God's Grace. And as you can see on the pattern, there is back stitching that will complete the letters and make everything pop. So I'm just going to follow the pattern and do the back stitching just like I did for these letters, you know, as you can see here. And I'm just going to go around all this cross stitching and then do the extra back stitching to make these letters come to life and really pop. And I just want to show you real quick the back of my work. As you can see, things are very, very neat. I make sure that I've got, you know, all of my tails are secured under other stitches, and then I trim them really, really close so I don't have anything hanging out. For this design, the biggest thing that you have to worry about, you know, with those tails, again, is that they would, if you had a lot of extra, it would show through the fabric once you mount your picture. And then once you get to where you're more advanced in your cross stitch, if you don't keep things really neat back here and you're working with a design that, you know, all of this would be really filled in and, you know, a solid, you know, picture, if things were really messy, it would just make it more and more difficult to work with, and particularly if you had long tails getting in the way of your other stitches. So the earlier that you learn to be really neat with your work, the better it's going to work for you. And I'm going to move on and do that back stitching, and then I'm going to come back and show you once that's complete. Okay, now I have finished doing all the outlining around these letters, and you can see it makes so much more sense. You can see how the placement of the cross stitching makes sense now. And the next step I'm going to work on is all this beautiful little vining around the pattern. It goes all around here on both sides, and that's going to be the next part I work on. And if you'll see, it's a dotted or dashed line, and if you look on the legend, it shows you that the dashed line is going to be with color 367, and that's going to be our medium green, is going to be with the color that all the vining is going to be done in. And in the same way that we did the black, it's going to be using 2 plies of thread. And you're just going to count, you know, like I'm probably going to start here right below this W, because it's going to be an easy place to count from, and it's going to be pretty much at the start of the vine at the top of it. And then you just, like, when you see it go diagonally like that, you stitch diagonally, and then diagonally this way, and then straight, and you just follow the pattern, doing the same number of stitches across the same number of squares that correlate to your fabric. You can see all the little squares. So when it shows a diagonal on a square on the pattern, you do a diagonal on the square on the fabric, and so forth. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to take my cloth loose from my hoop, and I'm going to have to move it, and I'm probably going to have to reposition it, you know, several times as I work around, so that wherever I'm working is going to be within the center of the hoop. And again, you just want to keep your fabric stretched a little bit tight within the hoop, because it makes it a lot easier to move the needle in and out of the holes in the fabric. And once I get started on the vining and get a little bit done, I'm going to show it to you.